whatever.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is at 10 a.m., Friday, January 17th. And we'll do roll call. Sean Emmerich.
Here.
Steve Reinhardt.
Here.
Barbara Evans.
Here.
Dave Motley. Scott Regan.
Here.
Doyle Williamson.
Here.
Mike Morgan.
Here.
And Robert John Dean. We're missing two.
Steve, I did not recognize you.
I know.
You're only the fourth person that said that.
All right, so take a quick moment, just welcome Scott Regan, who is our newest member, is taking over the slot for Diana Rose for a term that expires in 2021. And discussion of possible action to excuse committee members' absences, if any. Is he there?
I don't think we've received any feedback on either the public members that aren't here that they were not going to be here.
Okay.
Did you receive an email?
On one of them, I did,
Okay.
I believe. Yeah, Dave Motley.
Dave Motley said he couldn't make
He
it.
couldn't make, he's had a cruise scheduled.
Oh, okay.
Poor guy.
All of a
Someone
sudden,
has
a
to go on
cruise.
vacation. What is it? Entertain a motion to excuse Dave Motley.
Second.
I don't know.
Any discussion on that? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? One committee member's absence is excused. Number 3, ratification of the minutes of October 7, 2019 meeting. Anybody have any adjustments or modifications or amendments need to be made to the minutes? If not, entertaining motion to approve.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes.
Aye.
October 7th.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Perfect. Unanimous. Number 4, general comments from visitors on non-agenda items. If there are any visitors that would like to speak on any items that are not specifically on the agenda, please step forward at this time. Also, if you are a visitor and want to comment on an agenda item, please fill out the public meeting comments form and submit that to the table when you get a moment, please. And we'll move on to item number 5, election of officers. For chair, vice chair, and secretary, we'll start with A, the chair. Entertain a motion to nominate for the chair position for the 2020 year.
Don't we keep it for another year?
Is that a second?
Spread the wealth.
All right, so the nomination, is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay.
Are you nominating
We could do
anyone?
this every year, right?
I'm really tempted right now.
We had no
This is where you nominate the person
I know,
here.
I know, I'm really tempted right now. All right.
Who hasn't been here?
All right, since there's only one, we don't need to vote on that, I'm assuming, right?
Let's go through the motions, just
Okay.
for cleanliness.
Um,
We'll see
there's a
how
motion, let's
supportive
just to
people
see.
are of
There's a
it.
motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. All right, and vice chair, entertain nominations for the vice chair position for 2020. Bueller.
Steve, are you wanting to do
Who's
this?
everybody looking the other way now?
He's not acknowledging you.
Who's the current vice chair?
Was it me?
Well, someone takes this role seriously. Is it me?
So do you have any nominations?
I'll do it again, since I don't even know.
You gonna nominate him?
Yes.
Sounds like it's a tough position.
It's a very challenging position.
Nomination for Sean Emmerich has been seconded. Any discussion on this item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
This year.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. And carries. Item C, 5C, entertain nominations for secretary.
the current
Mike?
Steve. Steve's the current secretary.
This sounds like we got a trend going here.
Sounds like it.
I'm okay with it. Anybody wants to?
Somebody going to nominate him?
I nominate. Okay.
Yeah.
Scott Regan nominated Steve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Barbara. Any discussion on this item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say no. Election of officers has been completed. Reports from the subcommittees. Education Subcommittee.
We have not done anything new, still pending what's happening with our stuff on hold. And I guess, I don't know if you've heard anything from the
Yeah, we'll
state.
talk about that later.
Okay.
We do need to though, and that doesn't
Work on
need to
this.
happen now, but we do need to meet and start talking about the SOP course.
SOP update, yes.
Okay. Standards of Practice Subcommittee.
Nothing to submit for this meeting. I sent out, or under the direction of this committee, I developed a draft example starting point for the standards of practice and sent those out on October 17th to everyone but Mike. I didn't have your contact information. And requested in November 7th, I believe, that all those that received it, that they could give me feedback on exactly what they would want as part of the draft by the end of the year. Excuse me. I didn't receive anything back. Nothing at all.
In my defense, I had a hard drive failure and I lost about 45 days of my Outlook emails, and I kept forgetting to email you to ask you to send it again, but I can't find it.
I'll resend it.
But
Did you got my response after the first of the year?
Yeah, I was
Like,
hoping for by the end of the year though, so I could put something together. I didn't get anything back.
Yeah, I responded right after a year or so. Okay. Since we're on this topic, let's go ahead and look at the structure of the subcommittees. Being that we only have 2 instead of 3, which we had last year because we got rid of the enforcement subcommittee. Previously, we had 2 inspectors and 1 public member per subcommittee. So now, being that we only have 2, I guess we can't have 5 because that would be a quorum.
Right.
So we can go up to 4 total members, right? So I would assume 3 inspectors, 1 public member.
Well, however you want to do that, but the issue would be then if you wanted to attend,
Right.
because you can't, yes, your prerogative, someone else would have to sit out if that was the case. So that's, I mean,
Just have to make sure there's no more
yeah,
than 4
no
together.
more than 4 people.
which is not uncommon.
Right.
Just given
It's
schedules.
not common that you get 100% attendance in the subcommittee
Yeah.
sometimes anyway.
Well, I mean,
But it
it's,
happens.
I like to be involved in the subcommittees, but truth be told, if I'm not, then that's not really gonna hurt. That's the whole point of having the subcommittees report to the main committee anyway, so. Education, for the education subcommittee, chair for the education, do you wanna stay as the chair, or you willing to stay on as chair?
I'm willing to,
Okay.
unless somebody else just has a
No.
big drive.
I think resolve what you got going on.
Okay. Barbara Evans, are you willing to stay on in the education subcommittee? Barbara, can you hear me? We'll get back to Barbara. Well, if you don't answer, you get nominated. That's the way it works.
She may be answering muted.
I think I don't want to speak for her, but I think she'll be okay.
I think she's probably good. Okay, so. Let's see. What about, because I'm out. So Steve, Barbara, who was the other one that was on the
Educator.
education?
Me.
Was it you? Can we do that again? Sure. For SOP.
Did you want to do 4 or just the 3?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just asking because you had raised that, putting.
Well, I was thinking about Dave Motley or Robert John Dane, but they aren't here. But then again, if you're not here, you tend to get volunteered. So,
You know, we need to share it.
yeah, we will. He's coming. I know where he's going. How about we go with Robert John Dane there in that other education spot?
Okay.
SOP, Doyle, you've been the chair for the last couple of years. I'd like to kind of change this up a little bit. Sean, are you willing to take on the chair, that position for SOP subcommittee?
Yep.
Doyle, would you be willing to stay on and continue on that committee?
I don't see how that's productive.
Okay. All right. Would you like to be on education instead?
Where are you going to put me?
Okay. Then why don't we do that? Why don't we go put you on education? And we will move Robert John Dane down to SOP. Mr. Regan, would you be willing to serve on SOP?
Yes. Just three.
Scott, Geraldine. Is that what? I got 3, but I don't have Mr. Motley on one, so let's put Dave Motley on that one as well. All right, so to reiterate, Steve Reinhardt, Chair of the Education Subcommittee with Barbara Evans, Mike Morgan, and Doyle Williamson. SOP, Sean Emmerich, Chair with Robert John Dane, Scott Reagan, and Dave Motley. Moving on to number 7, staff reports. Administration and Management Services, please.
I guess I could start. I would like to just make everyone aware that we do, since the last meeting, have a
No, he did.
new executive director, and that's Chelsea Buckholz. She's currently straddling both that and GC right now, but
We have hired a general counsel, Vanessa Burgess, who's coming from the Railroad Commission. I keep saying that wrong. And she'll start on the 3rd of February. And then we have also shifted Mark's duties. Mark Moore is currently the Director of Enforcement, and he has graciously agreed to come over to be a second Deputy General Counsel in our AMS division.
But I'm going to miss disciplining people.
They may just take on a little different form. So that'll be a really great team approach to utilize Mark's extensive background in this area, and then Vanessa has a more more of a general counsel background for other state agencies, so she doesn't have the real estate experience. So I think that'll be a really good team. So that's the news on the staff fronts.
yeah, there's a couple of things that we need to address, but they'll be brought up as they come up on agenda items. One is the consumer protection notice. The other one is the proposed education rules that are currently under review at the governor's compliance division. So we'll talk about those as those come up.
Okay. Anything else from AMS?
I'll throw this out because I like to make you guys aware of when this stuff happens. I did go speak to the Central Texas TPREA chapter in December. I think it was in December. Talked to them about the proposed education rules and answered questions. And so,
Okay.
still trying to do some outreach out there. So that's it. I think that's all I have.
Standards and Enforcement Services.
Good morning, everyone. Before I get to the report, I want to piggyback. I will be talking to TPREA on Tuesday, actually, at their monthly meeting. So,
Cool.
up and round. So what you have here, like normal, this is the, we did 3 formal disciplinary actions since we last met. One's standard with the inspection form, and the 2 others are, if you did review the orders before the meeting, they're pretty clear in regards to why we did and what we did. So
No, I wanted to say thank you because you click on it and you go to the order and it's very descriptive. You know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, the 3rd one, it sets out why
Yeah.
it's a more severe punishment
Right.
because that person had other issues
Multiple.
prior.
Yeah.
No, thank
So
you very much.
That's when we
That was-
step it up when it comes to.
That was definitely much clearer. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And if you have any other questions, I stand by.
Okay.
Questions, comments.
Anybody have any other questions for standards of enforcement? All right. Education and examination services.
Amber, I just emailed that. Lisa had emailed too.
Boom.
Can you guys see that? I can't, I'm just asking.
I guess I see it
How
now.
about now?
She did it.
Better, okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the newish EE1 report, which is the truck examination activity year-over-year report. You can see a little bit of an upward trend, I think. And I went back, I looked at 2017 also, and 17 was when we were still really high in numbers, had a lot of new inspectors coming in, and so there was a big drop in 2018, but now I'm seeing,
Trickle back up.
seeing it trickle back up, so I think that's good. And also, if you look down and just look at the overall exam pass rate activity, you'll see those percentages increasing as well, so I think that's a good trend. Are there any questions about this report? Okay, thank you.
That it for you?
That's it.
Licensing and registration services.
Yeah, good morning. Denise Sample, Director of Licensing and Registration Services. And you guys have our L1 report. At the bottom is the real estate inspector applications received through November of 2019 and renewal activity. So just to point your attention, we do have an increase in the number of professional inspector applications over this time last year and real estate inspector applications, and a reduction in the number of apprentice inspector applications. It's only 3 months into the fiscal year, so I'm not sure if that's an overall trend or not. And then the renewal activity, we have the comparison of last fiscal year, this current fiscal year, and then we pull in 2 fiscal years prior because that's the same license holder population that's renewed. Essentially the same.
Pretty good uptick.
And I'm happy to answer any questions about that report.
Okay. Moving right on. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay. Item number 8, discussion and possible action regarding amendments to the Truck Consumer Protection Notice CN1-2 proposed at the November 19, 2019 truck meeting. Tony?
Do you want to talk through, and we're tag teaming this one, but do you want to talk through your conversation that you had
Mr.
with,
Kenneth?
yes, at the last commission meeting, and just kind of give everyone the lay of the land on that?
So we had gone through and staff had come up with the section that you see in blue to add to the consumer protection notice in regards to the liability issue and making sure that consumers know that inspectors are required to have insurance. We went through that, wordsmithed it. We proposed that to go to the commissioners last time, for recommendation. They approved it, but after the meeting, Commissioner Turner approached me and had some questions about it and wanted to see if we could possibly meet again prior to this meeting, but some things happened and wasn't able to happen. But basically, he wants to wordsmith that just to make sure there's a couple of issues that he has that he just wants to make sure are extremely clear from the get-go so that we only do this update once instead of doing it multiple times.
Yeah, so he, and, some of this occurred during the meeting. I don't know if any of you watched it, and then subsequent conversation after, where Commissioner Turner really just questioned whether or not this was helpful or harmful to consumers, in that if on the consumer protection notice we have something that says that license holders are required to carry insurance, we're not really informing them that they may also have a contract that limits that liability. In other words, it doesn't put them on notice to review that contract in any more detail to ensure that they are protected, which I think is a reasonable point. But so he wanted more information just to know kind of what the boundaries of the conversation are. We were very slow in getting him the information he needed for that. That only occurred this week. And so what we have, what we proposed really is just to pause on this until we can have further conversation with Commissioner Turner to get him comfortable with that, with this language or other language, or figure out the next step.
And I listened to the, I don't know, I guess I had trouble sleeping one night, so I did listen to the conversation pretty thoroughly. The impression I got, not having talked with Commissioner Turner, just listening to it, is I had the feeling he had the impression the limitations on liability were across the board and not the above Part G, which we have to stick with. We can't limit what's in the SOP. The limitations are things beyond that.
Right.
And he made no reference to that. I got the impression from him we were limiting everything, which meant even if we messed up an SOP thing, we were only going to offer, whatever limit we had. And I don't know that wasn't made clear during the discussions at the meeting.
And I think he understands that. He just wants to make sure that the consumer knows when they look at this notice that they know that inspectors have to have insurance, but the inspector may limit the liability of the inspection through a separate agreement for things that are outside of subchapter G. He just
And I
wants to
guess
make
that
it
could be
clear.
the clear part is, if I'm doing something above and beyond the SOP, I may limit that. I may attempt to limit that in the contract, but I can't limit anything that I'm required to do.
Right.
Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yes.
And that part, and I've gotten calls from, somebody who's read my agreement, and I kind of had that caveat, it's been in there 20 years, and they're like, am I really limited? And I explained to them, I cannot limit by law anything I'm required to do for you. And it's only a limit on maybe any extra things above and beyond that I offer to you that I can't afford, something. But as soon as I said that I can't limit anything I'm required to do, they were happy.
And I think that's probably what we're going to try and clarify in that.
I don't know how to say that.
That's
Because how do you tell somebody what is the part you have to do and what we're doing extra?
Well, and there may not, for an inspector, there may not be that distinction in some inspectors' contracts, which is a problem. And consumers may not know to look for that type of problem, given that we're saying, oh, they've got insurance.
Yep.
So kind of just figuring out that kind of tension there. It might be that it's better put somewhere else in the preamble of the report, kind of clean up that, we mainly want to get our commissioners very comfortable with where we're headed, and he raises a point that is a reasonable one.
Especially since he thought we were limiting everything.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
and I do, just not to open up a whole can of worms here, but I do want
I
to
mean,
just,
Commissioner Turner opened it.
I just want to throw this on the table, that even if something is not required by the SOP, the inspector by law has to be competent to perform anything outside of that. So that does, subchapter G, which is what the what the liability insurance covers, does cover that competency issue. So just to make sure we all understand that. So even if it's above what the SOP says, the statute says you can't do something negligent or incompetent manner. That's what subchapter G says. And the liability insurance covers violations of subchapter G.
So is there anything that we do in the performance of a typical inspection that you might legally be able to limit? If it came down to a judge? I mean, in the opinion?
Well, subchapter G covers all your SOPs, plus a lot of the administrative codes that are with there too, as long as you aren't violating those.
But he's saying
I think
also
that's the
anything
question.
else that you
My question goes
profess
to
do.
enforcement and legal on that.
I think the question is, if this came to a judge, how would it,
Yeah.
what would the result be? We don't honestly know, but one thing that Commissioner Turner, one thing that he said is that he thought it would go in favor of the inspector. And, right? Isn't that what he said?
I think he had some feelings that way, but I mean, we just don't know because the case that people cite to, that inspectors cite to, happened prior to the statutory requirement coming into place. So it's really not on point anymore, because that hasn't come into play, that there's a statutory requirement. Can they still do it? There haven't been any court cases in Texas about that. There have been in other states, but not in Texas, where there's a legal requirement to carry liability insurance, and there's a limitation in the contract.
And primarily, I think Commissioner Turner is in a very good position to do that analysis based on his legal expertise in similar fields. But I mean, there is nothing on point related to inspectors, but is there something on point that may be close? I think he has a lot of experience in that and just wants to make sure. I mainly want to tap into that expertise.
So whether we modify consumer protection notice or possibly put it in the preamble, that's
Yeah.
certainly over possibility. The goal being that it's a notice to consumers of where they stand, to make sure that they know to read that agreement between them and the inspector prior to going forward, while not getting Trek involved in the agreement between the inspector and the client.
Yeah.
So in essence, the discussion continues.
Right.
I'm so sorry.
And
No, it's okay. Like I said, I'd rather do it once and get it done and make sure it's right.
Yeah, be clean.
Because it might change the timeline.
so we'll hopefully have an answer. We'll have an answer compromised by the next inspector committee meeting. I mean, as I was talking when I was talking to the chair earlier, there's no real need to have this done quickly.
No rush.
No rush.
There's no pending
Right.
cases. or anything.
Is there, does it make sense to, once this decision is made on this, would it be wise to give inspectors a little bit of information on what they're legally allowed to
No, I think
limit?
so.
I mean, instead of just putting it here, I think this is something that all inspectors need to hear.
I agree. I think an article, maybe we do Facebook Live for that too. Something, just get the word out once we kind of have our ducks in a row with some of that. But as Chelsea said, there may be a gray area until the courts weigh in on this, because we just don't. There's some things we just don't know until that happens.
Yeah.
Plus, we can put it in the Trek Insider, and as he just mentioned, we can put that in the legal update class, stuff like that too. So that, and that's something that they may not read the Insider, but they have to take that legal
Right.
update class.
Because I think there's some inspectors who think that they are limiting their liability to the cost of the inspection.
Yeah.
Well,
They need,
I think you're right.
and they need to realize.
And I think that's Commissioner
that they-
Turner's concern.
Okay, yeah.
And I think the way this conversation started long before I arrived, I think it seemed to me that there was a threat that we would be, by rule, removing that ability. And I'd like to shift that conversation to say that if a court weighs in on this, what would they say? And therefore, how do we position inspectors to protect consumers, number one, but also know what the boundaries of the law are on the front end, so that they don't have to wait until a court rules.
Anybody else?
So as of right now, that blue part is not in.
Correct.
Right.
It's
It will
not
not.
there.
Yeah, we will not be moving forward with. Oh, well, it's your decision whether to
Yeah,
move
it's
forward.
on-
I mean,
or
there
not, but-
isn't, there, right now, if I looked on the website, it doesn't have that phrase in it.
Right. That was the proposed amendment.
Correct, and the staff recommendation would be to just sit tight, basically. This will not be on the agenda on the February meeting, or it would be our recommendation not to include it, so that we get on the other side of the conversations with Commissioner Turner, have the benefit of his expertise, and then determine the best step.
Consensus, everybody okay with that? All right, moving on, item number 9, discussion of possible action regarding amendments to 22 TAC 535.216, renewal of license proposed at the November 19, 2019 Trek meeting.
So this is on the agenda because it is on the commission's agenda in February for adoption. This body recommended moving forward with proposal. At the November meeting, the commission did do that. There have been no comments. So there's nothing before this group to consider that's any different than you've seen before. Oh, we did.
So that would entertain a motion to,
I just lied to
Oh,
you.
you-
There is one comment. It's on page 9 of your materials. And it is not negative in nature. It's, oh, yes it is. She says, I do not agree with this.
We're not sure, I don't know what she does not agree with, though.
I don't either.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that either.
She reiterates the purpose of the rule and just says she doesn't agree, and I don't know if it's with the statutory requirement to not take action on someone who's delinquent on student loan, or with reorganizing it so it's better to read. I just don't have any feeling.
So I would tell you that the reason for the rule changes are to implement statutory changes during the legislative session. So the concepts we must move forward on. If it's the organization or the actual wording or details, you could disagree with that, and that could be considered, but that's unclear.
So from our side, do we need a motion to recommend for approval, or just, that's what I thought, okay. So entertain a motion to recommend for approval, or now the renewal license proposed. Motion made by Steve,
Second.
second by Sean. Any discussion on item number 9? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 10, discussion and possible action regarding amendments and new rule relating to regarding inspector pre-licensing education requirements to ensure the content aligns with the inspector licensing exam subject matter in accordance with the Sunset Commission's Management Directive 2.6, including the 4 items below.
So a lot has happened with this rule since the last time this body met. Was it prior to the commission meeting or after the
It was
commission meeting?
just before the commission meeting.
We received notice from the governor's office. They had set up a new statutory division, this compliance division, in which they asked us to submit these rules for review. About the way the division works is that agencies that are proposing rules that deal with market competition need to submit them to this compliance division for the compliance division to weigh in on them. They can have their own hearing as well to take comments, and then we'll determine whether the agency can move forward or not, or if there need to be some changes. So we're still in that process. We sent a response to them and submitted the rules. They sent back some questions that we're in the process of answering. There are 3 items that they've touched on that likely need to be addressed because there's some oversights and just moving some stuff around that I want to address. But I didn't know if Chelsea wanted to weigh on anything before I do that.
Just on timing and process?
Okay.
Is that what you want to? I think go through your things first.
So there are, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to do, but I'll start with the first one. The intention, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the intention for out-of-state inspectors coming into Texas who have already passed the national exam is that they take the state portion and pass the state exam. So there's a bit of a reciprocity thing there. The language as it's drafted doesn't really take that into account, even though that's intent. So there needs to be an amendment to. Let's see if I can find it here. It's 209. If you have it in front of you, 209 I 3. Is that 3? So if you know, that's on page 2. It's on page 11 of your materials.
Middle of the page.
Middle of the page on the left-hand side, where it says, if the applicant has had the national portion of the exam waived as provided by subsection C. Well, subsection C is going away, so that right there is a misstatement. Before the applicant is eligible to take the state portion of the exam, the applicant must submit evidence of completion, and then it lists all this stuff. So we're recommending making a suggested, or making an amendment to that says if the applicant has previously passed the national portion of the examination, before the applicant is eligible to take the state portion of the exam, the applicant must, and then list those things. So it's just to clarify that this is what this language is held over for when people come in. We can waive that. That's not the case anymore. We're just going to, if you've passed it, you're eligible to take the state portion. It says so that's one recommended change. The second is on 535.212 D2, which your materials don't unfortunately show that because there's no change to that. but there's currently an exception to, there's an exception to education requirements. There was that one exception if you were an engineer in training, or an architect, and then there was a broader exception that if you'd met certain requirements or done related work over a certain period of year, and you were able to submit 2 affidavits. All of that was removed in the most current iteration of the proposed iteration of the rules. I don't think that second exception was the intent of the committee. I just need you to weigh in on that. I know the removing the exception to those specific license types was, but I don't think it was the committee's intent to remove that broader exception that if you've done related inspection work, that you could submit affidavits and get an exception based on that. I could be wrong, but I wanted you
An
guys to weigh
exception
in
on
on
the
that.
education requirements?
Yeah, so.
Were
did
we,
To exempt, yeah, certain.
So-
were we exempting education requirements or experience requirements?
It's substitute experience, so it's right here. It's the exception. So it's, if the applicant has 3 years of experience in a field directly related to home inspection, including but not limited to, list all these things, and provides the commission 2 affidavits from a person whose personal knowledge of the applicant's work, detail, and time and nature. So that, this 2A was eliminated along with 2B, and I don't know if that was the intent of the committee to eliminate that as well.
There was discussion on, it says may be awarded, and the question came up from staff is what kind of standard would we use if, say, someone was coming forward and they were a maintenance guy at an apartment complex and he's been doing it for years, so he knows a lot of stuff. How would you apply that to the experience requirement as a home inspector? It was really, like you say, broad and vague. And it was like, I mean,
Do we get any of those, Jen?
Oh, we do, yes.
Okay.
Quite a few.
And how do we process them now?
We review the information they submit. You know, they work with the home builder, they built homes for 5 years, or they inspected, and then this would also be the category of someone who inspected, performed inspections in another state that maybe doesn't license them like we do, or some, you know, that category is also covered.
So what's the potential that they would receive? Like our experience requirement is so many hours, would you credit a portion of it?
In these cases, we follow the language in the rule that they've got the experience installing, servicing, repairing, or maintaining structural, mechanical, and electrical systems.
So it's all
So
or
it's-
nothing on the experience? I mean,
Yes,
it's-
because then it becomes very subjective if we're applying parts of it
That's
to
what
the
I was-
experience.
that's
It's
what I was
really,
curious.
it's really applied to someone who has been inspecting homes or building homes and running through the inspections with the builder, things like that. Those are the examples that we've seen.
So not somebody who has been installing and servicing air conditioning systems or
It-
an electrician.
The wording that we follow is exactly what's.
And I think
what's
that
in
was part of
rule.
it is,
So not solely, I
Not
think is what
solely
you're asking.
Yeah.
servicing,
Like
you
one
know,
component.
the electrical system. It's got
It has
to
to
be
be.
all of them.
I mean, the idea of an inspector coming from a state that doesn't license, I mean, that kind of makes sense. Coming from the side of I know lots of superintendents that are, you know, working for builders, and they may understand mechanical systems and stuff, but I don't know that you would really waive their experience requirement and allow them to just take the academic and get their license as an inspector. I think that was kind of the discussion. Was it going to be providing a equivalent or better inspector than someone who actually went out and learned?
Or-
Do they still have to take courses?
Yeah.
Education?
This is the
Yes.
experience side.
So we're talking about,
Talking about 40-hour ride-along that they're basically
like
getting?
what do we waive, what experience do we
Yeah, What are
waive?
they getting?
I'd have to look at that.
And I think that was the discussion, yeah.
I have a guy that's starting with our company, he's been doing construction for 9 years, building as a superintendent, starting his classes, and you guys just waived his ride-along requirements, but he still has to do the national and the state, but they said you don't have to do the 20 hours ride-along. So they don't waive the whole thing, they look at it case by case, and he's had 9 years over here, and they said, okay, well, you don't have to do your 20 hours ride-along, you can go forward with this part. So he applied, They don't take away the state and the national.
No.
They take
That's
part
all the
of-
academic side.
Right.
We're only talking experience.
So you
Right.
still have to take the courses, you still have
So
to
that's-
pass the
it still has to
exam,
do
you
with
just don't, we just
everything
waive the
else.
experience requirement, which, for, I guess in this case, with the newer rules, if they were adopted, would be the practicum, the 40-hour practicum would be waived.
So the idea is, I guess the question is, as experienced inspectors, do you think, I mean, the practicum is basically apprenticing with someone. Is what it's designed to do, is look like. Do you think being a superintendent, a repair guy could replace going out and doing inspections with somebody in a practicum?
You've got to do some inspections to learn how to do an inspection.
I mean, that was my feeling. I don't know, and I've seen some really sharp guys, but they're exceptions.
I think, and that's fine, we just need some clarification, because what the governor's office is asking this question is there an exception for people who have similar experience? And if not, why?
I mean, it's how similar. I have veterinary experience, so they don't give me a medical doctor to do.
I
Well-
could see getting some education experience, but
What if we were to limit the exemption?
Why, it would be difficult with the rules proposed with the practicum, how would you do that?
Just saying as a compromise on that, because I can see.
I thought I remember talking about, yeah, we were taking those exceptions out.
Okay,
And it
I
was-
just couldn't
and it was-
recall that. That's why this is up for discussion, because I just needed some feedback from the committee on whether
And
this
we
is
also
all or
thought it
nothing.
was so hard for the education department to evaluate those.
It's very subjective. It's a lot of gray area.
It is, I would, so the way the governor's office is going to see this as is as a barrier to entry, which is kind of a buzzword for them right now. Trying to remove as many barriers to the entry into a field as possible.
It's a week of training.
It's
in a
just a
career.
week of training, but it's also just a week of training versus however many years of experience. Now, they're still required to be competent. They can't act negligently, which means they need to believe that they can do an inspection based on their education on the SOPs and complete that report. So they need to be able to do it in order to,
But currently, they don't even complete a report.
right,
But
they would have
take a
to,
report writing class.
right?
Which is part of the new curriculum.
Part of the
So
new curriculum.
do our existing licensees, and we still see wrong forms every time. I mean, it's not, I remember the discussion talking about the education, and it was kind of the feeling, unless somebody's exposed to doing an inspection, and yeah, if he's got a lot of experience, he's got building blocks all the way up, he's just connecting the dots. But those dots, as an inspector, are never connected to the mechanical understanding they have of all the elements of a home. Yes.
That's why they're taking it as a case-by-case person. And where it states in there is, I couldn't verify for his background. His employer did, and his boss did verify that he'd been doing this. And it's a detailed list they have to submit. It's not an easy form. And he submitted it, and they said, you don't have to do the 20 hours, but you have to do everything else.
And once they come to you as a training provider,
Yeah.
and you get them out in the field, and you're like, I don't know what they were thinking. You don't know.
That means more training.
I mean, that's, I could, it brought a lot of gray area, and that was, I thought, I remember, yeah, that whole two just kind of went away. But if the committee as a whole thinks that you have to leave it in,
Well, I think you could make a distinction between 2A and 2B.
yes.
2B is, to be or not to be. 2B is a bit arbitrary in the selection of those particular license types.
Yep.
So that makes sense.
A is directly related to this industry.
Yeah, so A to me was a little bit more of a gray area, and I could see putting that back in, but I'm not on the committee. It's you guys are the ones that make that recommendation.
I'm trying to look at it from somebody who's, like the guy that you had, or anybody who's worked for a builder for a number of years and whatnot, and he's wanting to transition to this. How many people do we have in this industry that were set at a desk for 30 years, and now they've retired and decided to become a home inspector, and they've gone through all this stuff, and do they have, are they going to get in that 40 hours what that other guy has gotten in 10 years of being with a builder?
No.
Probably not.
I think there's something to giving them credit, and the challenge was, how did we do that?
Well, I
So
think
that
the
would
opening
be-
there is where it says the commission may award substitute experience. Or it's not saying the commission will award substitute experience. It gives the commission the discretion to know whether they actually have justifiable experience to get rid of that or not.
What's the success rate of requesting an exemption to the experience? Is it
Like how-
something you approve most of them because they look good?
It's not about looking good, it's whether it fits the
Yeah.
full definition of that section of the rule.
Okay.
And so they're submitting the affidavits that describe the type of work that they've done and making sure that they're covering all of the elements that are required in that section. So, I mean, obviously, we're not going and looking at the work that they did.
And I don't
you
know if we provided good information on what to look for versus, I work on air conditioners and I work on roofs, and I don't know if, I mean, in the past, I think kind of the impression was it wasn't an avenue that was utilized that much, but you're saying it is?
I mean, I can't speak to how much, I can't speak to how many applicants, are licensed who submitted, one of these exceptions. I don't have that information. We could look into getting that information. But I don't see a lot that don't meet that requirement.
Okay.
And like I said, it's typically someone who has been licensed in another state. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this exception also allows someone who held a license previously for at least 5 years. They would meet this exception and would not have to do
I would feel
the
pretty,
ride-along portion.
I personally would feel pretty good if if we made the requirement that one of the recommendations was from a licensed inspector. I mean, you get recommendations from your previous boss or, if you got a recommendation from an inspector, at least you got one from somebody who's
So let's-
really doing what you're asking to go do without
Well,
experience.
So let's-
And to clarify, it's not a recommendation, it's an affidavit saying that they have personal knowledge of the
How
applicant
detailed is it?
having
What you're saying.
performed that work.
Is
It's
it-
a form that's on the website.
If we get a recommend, let's
It's
take
the
somebody
same.
out in a rural area who,
Yeah.
you're gonna ask them to go get a recommendation for somebody who's
Yeah.
going to be their competitor on whether they can become an inspector or not.
Well, it shifts the burden to another license holder from our licensing department, which is where it is
Yeah.
probably most
Eliminated just
appropriate.
in D or also in E.
I mean, it's
I don't know,
required to have, they are required in that, to AI, they're required to have experience in three areas, and that's an and, not an or. Structural, mechanical, and electrical systems. It's not an or. So if they are somebody who only dealt with structural, or only mechanical, or only electrical, that does not apply.
Is that
I'm a
correct?
superintendent.
There's no partial.
It's an all or nothing.
I mean, as a superintendent, I see electricians working all the time. Is that experience?
No.
I don't
No.
do it because I'm not licensed to it. They
Well,
can't do
No.
it.
But that wouldn't count,
Yeah,
because
that's
they're
what-
not installing, servicing, repairing, or maintaining. It would have to be one of those 4 activities, which is not
You have to do all
observing.
That's all three
You have to do all
areas.
4 of those activities?
No, it's
You can be
That's
one
an
of
or.
those, one
servicing,
of.
repairing,
But
or
all of them are
maintaining, but
action.
all 3 kinds of systems.
Yeah.
And there's
You
a
can do them all.
detailed form they fill out, and then people
Yeah.
attest that I have seen this person do it
I mean,
by
there's
penalty
some-
of death.
There's some challenges there because with the Texas electrical law, he's not allowed, the superintendent's not allowed to install, service, repair, or maintain electrical.
Right,
So
in that
he's
case,
already
the
out.
superintendent.
He wouldn't
qualify.
count.
Yeah, but that's where all the experience is too. That was the original intent. Here's guys that have been in construction all the time. So there's not many people that he would fit that bill, unless maybe he was a licensed electrician coming over to us. But I can see that as a,
I can see the usefulness of the exception,
Yeah.
especially if somebody's come from out of state or they have a lot of experience in other stuff. And I think that type of person could bring a lot to the industry that somebody who is just going to do this part-time and just going through the course.
and that was part of it is, we have a lot of states that don't license and then like they want to come to Texas, can we use their experience?
What this helps are the returning license holders as well.
Yeah.
And to follow up on what Lee said, one thing we also have to be aware of is the governor's letter about barriers to competition and reducing impediments, and so we have to always keep that in mind as well.
And they still have to take the rest of the courses.
Yeah.
It's just one piece of the puzzle that they wouldn't have to.
I'm fine with,
comply.
I'm fine with, I like being able to use that experience. It's just hard to evaluate and quantify.
It's not easy. is you're breaking down your whole history of life for the past 10 years. I know it's one form, but it ends up being like 6, 7 pieces of paper and different and additional information. In this case, he was asked, we need some additional information in your category in this area. So we went back and forth, and then they said, okay, you're empty out of the 20 hours of ride along, but you still have to do all this other stuff. And I'm just using a case that I know that.
And then they're going to the provider, how much you gonna refund my class?
Okay, I'm sorry. Well,
Okay,
there was
so
one, there was one more thing I want to talk about, and then at the end of it, if you guys are comfortable with these, then we can talk about what to do about them. So the final thing that, and staff will take ownership on this. If you remember at the last meeting, there was a section in one of the rules that we weren't sure, we couldn't remember why it was there. It was the, person taking, that if a person was, we wouldn't take credit for a course, let me see how I word this, that a course taken for, courses completed for a real estate inspector license under whatever section shall count towards identical qualifying coursework for licensure for professionals. So in other words, you don't have to take the same course twice. And there was a 5-year limitation on that, within 5 years. And we were thinking, why is this in there? We couldn't remember. And we said, oh, well, the courses last forever. There's no time limit on the courses, so why we did this. So we recommended removing it. You guys said, yeah, go ahead and remove it. Well, the problem is now, without that in there, it I think moves away from what the intent was, which is if I'm taking whatever course is required as a real estate inspector and then I'm upgrading to a professional inspector, that course, I shouldn't have to go back and take that again, which is the whole reason the sunset was like there's duplicative here. So we would ask that we just put that language back in, but remove that 5-year limitation, because there's no real reason to have that in there, especially with these rules going into place that they'll all be new courses anyway. So just
without it, what is the implication?
without it is there's an implication that you have to take the same. If you're upgrading, you have to take
Start
the
all
If you're a
same.
over.
You
real
have to
estate
start
inspector, you gotta
over.
take the same
No,
course.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Right, you needed to
And
take
that wasn't
building
the
module
intent,
1 and 2
obviously.
for real estate, and then you'll need it
We-
again for professional.
We removed this for reasons that we thought, because none of us could remember why it was in there, and the reason why it was in there is so that you don't have to
Yep.
take the same courses again. So we would just recommend putting it back in, but removing that 5-year limitation.
So the idea is like the real estate inspector's 90 hours, the professional's 135. When you're moving up, you only take the 45 hours difference.
Yeah.
And that seemed clear to us, but the way it's worded,
But we
you'd
took
have
the-
to
but
do
we
We
took
that.
took, but we took out this
Oh.
specific thing in the rule that said,
Yeah.
we're going to count these towards your credit. You don't have to take it again. We
Yeah.
removed that because staff was confused.
And it's not a small
I think it was
piece, because
probably
how many
my
people
fault.
look through it as a real estate inspector and then bump up. It's a small piece, but still,
Well, yeah, that's,
you don't want them to have to read all of
Yeah.
it.
So I was
That's a
looking at this again,
no-brainer.
I couldn't remember why we took it out, and I had to go back and watch the old meeting, and then I was explaining something that was, anyway, so I apologize for that, but,
So you're taking credit for it.
I am taking credit for removing it. So, so those are the 3 rule amendments that we believe were legitimate concerns brought up by these initial round of questions. So,
You want me to talk about process?
yes, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, so what we've just talked about, what we intend to, we owe the governor's office a response. So we submitted these rules to them for their review. They have asked some clarification questions. We have a document drafted to get that to them probably today.
Hopefully.
Okay. That include these 3 things we've just talked about. So that are substantive in nature, right? That out-of-state people only have to take the Texas portion of the exam, to keep the general exception, and no repeat coursework.
Before we go on the process, should we not get a consensus of just where everybody's at on those 3 pieces?
Yes, we
to make sure
probably
we're in the
should,
same,
yeah. Just-
everybody's on the same table, on
Yes.
the same page. So we don't need a motion for that, it's just basically consensus in this particular case, because it's not something that we're forwarding, correct?
Correct. Well,
Okay.
that's kind of the process question. So let me walk you through
Okay.
it, and then you
All
can
right.
see what you think. So what we'd like to do is respond to the governor's office, as we've explained. The governor's office has until, I want to say February 26th, 27th, somewhere in there, to provide their answer to the rule review, which is clearly beyond the February 10th commission meeting. They may respond more quickly than that. So what we would like to do is have these rules ready to be reproposed because we believe that there is enough substantive change that would require that reproposal. Have that ready for February if you would like for us to. And what that would mean is that we would move forward and make these substantive changes that you have reviewed in content but not in actual language. But what we don't know is how the governor's office will respond, if they will have additional suggestions or requests that we need to account for. So we can have it poised and ready for February if you are comfortable with us moving forward as we've suggested with these content changes. We can also slow down and bring this language to you with these 3 content changes and anything else the governor's office suggests or requests to you at the next inspector meeting so that you can officially recommend something specific at the May meeting, which would then be adopted likely in August, pending any other issues, with an implementation over the fall, right? So it's kind of a question of whether or not timing is more important, speed, or additional review by, how much additional kind of control over that recommendation you'd like to have.
I think if we feel pretty good that they're not going to rebut with new things, then I know how that is.
I don't
It's like
know.
an inspector
Well,
going
so
back
we have-
and
we
finding
have-
something they didn't see the first
We
time.
have this response we have to send out today. Sorry to interrupt you. I apologize, but we have this response we have to send out today. We don't know what the reaction or the response from the governor's office is going to be based on this. We're just going with what we feel are fairly, we're confident with the answers we're providing, but they may have a different.
I mean, I think the answers are good, and if I was on the other end, I think I'd feel real good, and I like the idea, there's nothing wrong with potentially loading it up and having it ready to go, and just know that if they kick it back, it stops again
I
until
think-
our next meeting.
The only risk to us at this point is that we're not seeing the actual verbiage before it goes to that proposal. However, we'll still have a 3-month period
Yeah.
for comments that we can, if there are some little
Yeah.
minor changes that we want to tweak to it, we can still do it as long as it's a non-substantive change, and we should be okay.
That's exactly right. The other thing that we have not modified yet are the updated dates. The
Right.
whole reason for the re-proposal was to include these transition dates, right? So we will need to do that modification.
Extend those.
Yes, so as long as, we would, our process for that will be to look at what decision you made based on, how far in advance you wanted those rules last time, and then just make the modification to dates accordingly. But
Yeah, just kind of shifting the whole thing down the calendar.
that's right. And we can, and the governor's office is very well aware of the commission meeting dates. And we can reiterate that to let them know, that we'd like to move forward if possible. But it's really up to you. We do not, staff does not want any members of the committee to feel like we're pushing you to move forward, without a thorough review. But we also know that you'd like to get it done. So.
Those 3 are pretty
I
straightforward.
think they're pretty small and straightforward as far as what, and you guys, the education subcommittee put a lot of time and effort into that, and so did this committee.
I
as a
mean, with
whole.
just those 3 things, I would say lock and load it and send it.
I think we're good with that. Anybody have opposition to that or different opinion?
But I just for clarification's sake, those weren't the only 3 things they raised, but those are the only 3 things that we believed were things that we needed to address.
Right.
Anything else we would maybe be interested in? I mean, are
Kind of
most of
some
them-
reasoning for some things
Yeah.
in current rule and in the changes.
Yeah, just basically, why was this in here? What's the reason here? And a lot of it was pointing back to the statute, just statutory things they weren't aware of, or just clarifying things that this is what the statute, dictates, that kind of stuff. But where there were some things where we thought, oh, there's a valid point. We need to address or weigh in on this. Those were the 3 things that we brought up.
So everything else was just answering questions. These 3 items where we said, you may be right. Here's where we suggest a modification.
Okay, so with that being the case, what we would need at this point is a motion to move the proposal forward with the staff recommended amendments,
Yes. Theoretical amendments.
theoretical amendments. Anybody like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Barbara. Or a second?
Second,
Second by Steve. Any other discussion on this item?
is there a possibility of sharing that final wording with us?
Oh,
as a
yeah,
committee?
definitely.
Just an email to us to see if there's any other discussion as it goes to the.
Absolutely. There's also a huge chance that this is a moot point because
They may not
nothing
come back
comes
in-
back to us.
We all,
Right.
well, I think we all kind of know how that goes. Yeah. But there's a, I mean, if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you know what your odds are.
Can't
right.
win if you
Oh,
don't
that's
play.
true.
Yeah.
There you go.
You can't
Kinda
win if you
sad.
don't play.
Exactly.
Always buy
You're never
one.
gonna win if you don't buy the ticket,
That's
right?
right. That's a bet.
Yes.
The odds are zero. If we don't move forward, the odds are zero that anything happens this year almost.
Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 11, discussion of possible action to recommend proposed amendments to 22 TAC 535.210 fees.
Okay. Let me get there. This is cleanup work, really. And it's cleanup work in our rule. We have already implemented this in practice to the benefit of license holders. At the November commission meeting, the commission approved some elimination of fees that affected all license types. And those went into effect in January, this month. We did not, in rule, eliminate the fee for inspectors for preparing a certificate of active licensure or sponsorship. It's a $40 fee. We did intend to eliminate that rule and just did not do so officially. We did for other license types, but not for inspectors. And so what we did is when the fee eliminations and reductions were implemented in January, we did implement this elimination for inspectors. But we need the rule to catch up.
So we're not charging right now.
We are
Not for
not
that.
charging right now, but we need the rule to reflect that change.
And everything else is just renumbering according because you got rid of it.
That's exactly
It's right in
right.
the middle of it. You
Yeah.
gotta do that, yeah.
It's never at the end, it's always in, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Is it correct on page 2 at the top where it says 17C and 19C? Shouldn't those been moved up?
Are those
to-
still right? Yep, thank
Yeah.
you. Those aren't right
Which
anymore.
ones?
On the second page, right there at the top.
Yeah,
17.
19.
Oh,
17,
yeah,
18,
thank you,
16.
thank you. We'll make that
19 is gonna be-
change.
Hey, y'all are better at this than we are. Do you see any
You're already earning your
Yeah,
money,
it's
Scott.
earning
Thanks for being here.
There's always one of the.
Need double inspect. Yeah, double time.
Oh, he brought Thin Mints with him.
Okay, correct.
Somebody brought Thin Mints, but they're already gone.
Oreos.
And you have a bag of Oreos. No,
That's Oreos,
All right, entertain a motion to approve 22 TAC 535.210 as amended.
bro. Motion.
Motion
Second.
made. A second.
12 yours.
Second made. Any discussion on this item?
Well, it's Denise's.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries. Item number 12, discussion of possible action to recommend proposed amendments to 22 TAC 535.215, inactive inspector status.
So this rule amendment is also a bit of a cleanup item, I'd say. I describe it that way because it is eliminating the section that talks about an inspector who's applied for renewal and paid the fee, but has not completed CE. We will place the license on inactive status and approve the renewal. So this section of the rule was required, or needed to be there before there was a late renewal option for inspectors. Which, I don't know if you guys recall, that only came about in 2013. And now there's no need for that. Now you can process a late renewal. But the this section of the rule requires our staff to go in and check right up until the last day of the month to see if anybody's paid and just not submitted education yet. So we can manually set them to inactive and issue the renewal instead of just letting it go through the normal late renewal process.
Perfect.
Yep. Entertain a go ahead.
So what's happening right now, or what is it?
So before 2013,
Yes.
there was not a late renewal option. If your license expired, you had to reapply.
Got it.
You didn't have to take the exam if you
Oh,
reapplied
okay.
within a certain amount of time, but there was no late renewal option. And in 2013, statutory changes allowed for a late renewal option, and so this manual process by our staff to set it to inactive and issue the renewal, and forcing the inspector to come back to active later, that process was no longer required, but that section of the rule remained.
So if they don't renew, they're still inactive in the sense that they can't inspect.
They expire.
Is there a possibility that somebody doesn't, or reads into it that all I gotta do is pay a late renewal, but I can keep working while that's there?
No, because the rule provisions are still there that if you're active, you have to take CE to renew active. Just like
And on
if you're
midnight
renewing
of that day-
inactive, you don't have to take CE.
On
to
the
renew
midnight of
active.
that day, for how long can you just pay the late renewal fee?
6 months.
6 months. So you got 6 months that you don't have to do anything but, say in this example, do your CEs. And then once you receive the CEs, they've already paid for it and everything, all of a sudden they're active again, they can start working.
With the late fee,
With the late
depending on the
fee,
time,
yes.
yeah.
Okay.
And this mirrors the process for really all of our other licenses.
And that's up to 6 months.
Up to 6 months.
Because I know there was a discussion, I had an apprentice who was a year, he just didn't renew, wasn't using it, and a year later, he wanted to bring it back active, and then the question was, is it late renewal or is it a new license? He ended up a year later, and they gave him the same license number.
We do that because from a system standpoint, we have 210,000 license holders, so we will reissue the number,
Yeah.
but it's going to reflect a gap of a year. But he
Yes.
does have to, that apprentice had to reapply
Yes.
and meet whatever requirements are in place
It was
today.
kinda
If
confusing 'cause it was in
we'd
an
added
area.
education, or
Yeah.
since he first got licensed, if now there was an exam requirement, or something had changed, he'd have to meet the current requirements. And so a late renewal up to 6 months allows you to
It's
come back
clear.
without meeting all
If it's
new
after
licensing
6
requirements.
months,
Then you're reapplying.
then you're
We may give you the same number that you had,
Yeah, they
but
did.
you're meeting the current requirements as they are when you apply.
The question was, did he have to do CEUs? Because up to 6 months he had to do CEUs, but after a year, it's kind of like a new license. You don't have CEUs.
kinda
to
like
get
a
your
new
initial-
license.
It's an initial license again, but he had the old number.
Right, but a year, if we were to process an active license history or something like that, we'd show, and if he requested a license history online for that license number, it would show a gap.
Okay.
So for the purposes of this, this is basically just a redundant piece of the rule that just needs to go away.
Makes sense.
Entertain a motion to approve.
I recommend approval of change on the
Motion made by Steve, second. Second by Sean. Any other discussion on this item? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. All right, motion carries. Before we go to item 13, because I have a feeling this one's going to take a little bit, had a request to take a 10-minute break. So we'll call the time.
I don't think there's much to talk about on this one.
There's not.
There's not a whole lot to talk about on this. It's just an update.
You be all right?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so we'll skip that. We'll just go on to item number 13. Update regarding pending request for Attorney General opinion regarding the authority to perform sewer line inspections.
We submitted our brief on this in October, I believe. I think at the end of October. We've not heard from them other than we received it, thank you. The due date for the opinion is March 16th. So we're sitting tight. Is there anything else to talk about?
No, it's just an update, just to update you guys on the process and what we did, and just to give, if anything had happened, I wanted you guys to know.
So we'll have this on the agenda probably for our next meeting because that due date will have passed.
I mean, how does it actually affect us?
Because there's inspectors that want to do sewer camera inspections.
Yep.
Well, yeah, that's a
Sooner-
good question. So
sooner.
if the AG's office comes back and says
I can do it.
they can do it, then
I think.
So the possibilities are, they could come back and say, you can do this, plumbing board, take a hike. Or, no, Trek, I mean, your guys can do it, but they have to be
licensed.
blessed by
Yeah.
plumbing board.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really affect our license and what we do in our SOP.
No.
We're just
No,
looking
well,
to give some direction to license holders as
This,
far
this
as.
is a big deal in the industry. I mean, when I go to
Yeah.
those, when I go to those yearly things at the Tabria thing, there's
Yeah.
always 2 or 3 people that come up to me to talk about this particular issue and ask why we're not letting them do them.
Do you prohibit them? Or
Yes.
do you just say, you need to check with the plumbing board?
The
That's
plumbing
not
board
under-
prohibits that.
It's not the scope of our license.
The plumbing board prohibits. So if there's an interpretation that is different than ours, which is that this is the jurisdiction of the plumbing board, and it's not in our jurisdiction.
Yeah.
If it's deemed that it is in our jurisdiction, then we would want to promulgate rules
Yeah.
around that to provide some guidance.
So if they come back and say we can, then we gotta add it probably in our optional section of our SOPs.
I mean, that's an
I don't
open-ended
anticipate that.
box of how many things we could
Yeah,
add
they're
to
probably
the
not gonna
optional.
say it's okay, but.
We don't have an optional section for infrared imaging.
Right, and I think
We're
that's,
allowed to do
that's
it.
the
Yeah.
slippery slope we can start.
Yeah,
going
you're
down.
right.
So I don't know that we want to, I mean, I always wondered why we're even involved in saying you can or can't do something that's outside the scope of
We're
home
giving,
inspection.
all we've done is
I mean, I
give
see-
guidance to inspectors that if they do this, it's considered unlicensed activity by the plumbing board, if they're not
But
already
there's
licensed.
nothing enforcement's going to do, are you? Unless you get into the ethics side, you're doing unlicensed activity like electrical.
It's more of a warning that the plumbing board, what he says, the plumbing
What
board.
I've
can
told
do that.
people before, it's the plumbing board's jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Now, it would be possibly on the ethics side.
that's what I'm thinking.
You would have to, nothing to do with how they did it, but if they mislead people saying,
Yeah.
Trek's cool with this or something like that, then there's a section in there in the ethics about misleading the public about that. This just
And it's not
caveats.
necessarily.
You'd have to
this,
have a
it's anything.
fact-specific thing. We had a guy a few years ago, he misled people about the static line test. I can do these, Trek's all right with it. And we popped him for that type of misleading behavior.
But it's pretty much anything. You could say a caveat, anything
You
outside
could,
the scope.
you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're basically on your own and
Yeah.
don't mislead the public that you're qualified or licensed if you're not.
Yes, correct.
But this is just an example of,
So here's the thing,
yeah.
I've done some research in this area. And being a plumbing license as well, as I asked straight out from the board, plumbing board, and they said, we cannot restrict you from doing it if you're certified. And I said, okay, now, where do you get certified? There's questions all over the place. What this all comes down to is other states and other people are seeing it as a profit.
Yeah.
And it's coming to us as in Texas, and I get this question a lot because in the new SOP class in legal and ethics, it states in there no hydrostatic, no scoping, no drone unless you have a license, so it goes into that category as well, which falls under ethics. Is if you're using a drone for the purpose of doing your inspection and you're not licensed. So we're in the same category and we're bouncing back and forth. But what I get from plumbers as well is the damage that they've seen occurred from uncertified or uneducated people doing the scopes. That's where the plumbing board is coming down to as well. So it is a gray area, but at the same time, who's certifying everybody? The people that are selling.
But we've got a
That's
rule
who wants to
that
push it
talks
in.
about,
That's
you
worse.
know, don't, kind of ethically, don't do anything unless you're licensed to do that.
There's a
Competency,
competency issue,
yeah.
yeah. That's
It'd
what
just be like a home inspector designing foundation repairs. Trek has gotten involved with inspectors that have gotten outside their scope.
One's using the zip bells and tell you.
Basically,
Tell you where to put
the-
tiers and all that other
The
stuff.
professional
Yeah.
engineer board
Right.
members and not
Right.
us.
Yeah,
I mean, we
there's-
do it when they do no opinion, but if they go and they put a remediation schedule
Right.
in the report, we're just saying it's not appropriate, but the professional engineer board's probably gonna come back and say unlicensed activity.
Right.
The professional engineers, we met with them a while back, and they were very adamant that the inspector should never be saying foundation's in need of repair.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was very, very clear, from them, that they were very adamant about that before. So.
Right.
Okay,
All right, well, we do have
we're
a.
just kinda waiting to see what the
Yep.
agenda says.
You sure? All right.
Yeah, we're just waiting to see what the AG's opinion is, and we'll, this was just on here to update you guys if there was an update. Give you a heads up.
Okay. Anybody else on that item number 13? Request for future meeting agenda items.
Since Barbara's in and out, I didn't know if you wanted to ask her again, since she may be in.
Oh, no,
about-
she's on.
Okay.
She's on. Barbara, can you hear me?
I'm here. Yes.
What is it?
That's,
Education.
Education
Yeah,
committee.
we put you back on the education subcommittee.
Are you okay with that?
Yes. I got that.
Okay, good.
I did get that.
Tony asked us a question. I didn't. I just said we put you on back on the education.
Thank you, Barbara.
No problem.
All right, item 14, request for future meeting agenda items. So I'm assuming this will come back up, the opinion we should have by then.
I've got a question, something I brought up to Tony, I guess after the last meeting, the sponsorship forms that I talked to you about. I've got a friend who's an inspector in Brownwood, and he's trying to become a sponsor so he can have his wife apprentice under him. Well, you have to have done, I don't remember how many inspections.
200, I think?
Yeah.
And you basically have to
Yeah.
print out 20 of these forms and handwrite them because there's no provision for just sending in printing out your list of inspections any other way. And I think a way needs to
Is there on all?
be found to simplify
So
that.
is there an electronic alternative to filling,
I
hand
do
filling out the
remember that,
form?
Mike, and I think that I
There-
remember starting that, and I think I dropped the ball on following up on it. I apologize. We'll get you an answer on that.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if that was for anything that we could be discussing here or just something outside.
No, I think that's good. We can bring it
That's a
up next
pretty
time.
tedious thing in an electronic age.
Yeah, when you just print out an
Even,
Excel
20
spreadsheet or
or
something.
something, submit now.
So why isn't that the
Apprentice.
Yeah,
case?
because I did.
Yeah, but I think he wants to know why you can't just print something out and attach it, why you have to fill it out on the form.
The guy called Trek, and they said, no, you have to fill out 200 of
Our
them.
form, the inspection log?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why can we not just say, see attached and print it out?
In an Excel.
I can't speak to why, I mean, this form was created before I got here.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, because the form does also say, check here if you're a professional inspector and submitting this log to apply for approval to teach a course or to, it just
What's the name
is the
of the
same form we use.
form? We'll pull
It's
it
the
up.
inspection log.
Yeah.
REI,
It was
REI
there.
1-4.
I hand filled it out
Yeah.
20 years.
I just did one for.
I just,
did
like
one for
Roy,
a
like
apprentice.
Roy was just mentioning, I just think that attached mine and called it a day.
Well, so did I when I did mine years
Yeah.
ago, but
I've done
when
the
he
same.
called Trek a few months ago, they said, no, you have to
Well,
fill.
if we took yours as attached and we didn't make you fill it out.
Reject.
And
there's
mine
a-
too.
Not the
there's a-
full
He's not licensed
log.
anymore.
No, I did one log and then I did a
License
screenshot of
Yeah.
all my records
So,
and sent it
so
all
there's
in.
not consistency with this, so
Yeah.
that's what we
Yeah.
need to, that's what we need to look into, the consistency of this.
Well, and potentially changing the form to say, or attaching,
Yeah,
so that it's
Yeah.
clear.
for that consistency.
I was told to fill out one form and then attach the rest after that, so
Okay.
that you completed
We'll,
the form.
we'll get this fixed, we'll get it fixed.
All right.
Well, let's see. I do
Sorry
on
about
the,
dropping
on
the
the
ball.
Well,
education side, we do have to accelerate our timeline on getting the SOP. Kind of, we want to do with the SOP as far as providing a printout like we did with the legal and ethics.
We
2
want,
years
yeah,
ago.
the committee has discussed wanting to actually have materials that they have developed.
Okay, so we're not doing this through the
A&M?
A&M.
No,
No.
it's just
Do we
on,
think we can self-publish? Like, they basically took our information and just,
we self-published the legal
one.
ethics book.
Yeah.
The last version of that was A&M didn't help with.
so what is it they provided to us on that first version?
They pulled all the information together, they,
Basically created a template for us.
yeah.
And we
But-
can do that.
But we have someone on
PSP.
staff now that can do that.
We did it before.
which we didn't before.
What are the timelines that I need to target on this?
So
project?
both of those courses are up for renewal next, not this September, but next September. So I think if we have something, Jen's probably better at addressing this in terms of what the providers would need. They have to be approved by the commission.
Okay.
Aren't they on alternating years?
No, both of those are on the same.
They're both the
Because
same.
one's a form and one's a course.
Yeah, they're right after the
Okay.
legislature.
So we're in January of 20.
I mean, we
And
could,
had
we could
September of
alternate them if
20.
you think that's better. We could alternate them and just, that needed a rule change to
We're
alternate
19
them.
months out.
But,
Well, is this
that's,
something we should probably just put
I'll
on
think
our
about
next
it.
agenda to really take a look at?
Yes.
yeah, and we can meet with the, education subcommittee and kind of get the ball rolling on that part of it.
Because I want to look at, as far as becoming a trainer, we were having a conversation about this before, about being an actual instructor for legal and SOP.
Mhm.
For the real estate side, it's very easy. A&M does that course, you got to go through that, and it's fine, and you get credit. If you take the instructor course, that gives you the credit as legal and ethics. But I'm
Right.
hearing some conflicting things on the inspector side, so I just want to get some clarification.
Okay.
So,
The old
let's put
8
that-
hours where you have to do the trainer 8 hours,
Right,
it's not in there anymore.
right.
It had been moved out.
That's right. For the pre-licensing courses, which was also a requirement for
Right.
the non-elective courses.
So that was a question, because a lot of people's licenses are coming up that are training the trainer, because only good for 3 or 5 years, depending on what class you took. So it's got inundated up. Do I have to do it again? Because that was a $150 form, but you can't find it anywhere on the website anymore.
Okay, so I think, yeah, I understand your confusion, and we're two separate requirements. So you had to go do the 8-hour adult education instructor
Right.
training, and then you had to take, on the real estate side, the
An additional
legal
8
update
hours,
1 and
right.
2 instructor training. But one doesn't satisfy the other, and never did.
But
So-
what I'm getting at is people were starting to ask on the inspector side,
We've
to
never
do the
had
legal
that
and
before.
ethics, to teach the legal and ethics, you had to do the adult education class.
And that's gone.
That's gone now.
But
So
what I think this committee wants to work toward, or the education subcommittee, is toward having an instructor training specific to the legal and ethic
That
course
was-
and the standards of
Yes.
practice course.
We
Right.
wanted that 10 years ago, but it was
Yeah.
kind of who was going to run it and
Right.
how we were going to.
Because A&M does it on the real estate side, but you have a lot more license
Yeah.
holders.
So all
to-
they do is the registration and all the administrative functions of that. But, you know, we have contracted out teachers now for that.
And we had looked at like how many inspector instructors are there for MCE and looking at such a small pool of putting a class together to do that for them was like, who would want to do that?
Well, now with Trek no longer licensing, most of the inspectors, C instructors and that type of stuff, I think it'd just be good to put it back on the agenda.
But
really
they still
kind of
provide,
clarify that for
they still
everybody.
provide proof that you're qualified.
Because there's people that are from other schools too that have been calling and asking
Yeah.
me, and other schools are like, what do we do? What do we do? Because I always had to fill out this $50 form, the $150 form, and I'm like,
Right.
you don't have to do anything. The
Nothing.
school is in charge of it.
Right, right.
They make the recommendations of who can teach what class for them.
Mhm.
And that's where it just came out as, it's a confusion, it never got cleared, it just
Right.
happened at the first of the year, and now everybody's been, it's been a bunch of phone calls.
And if you're an independent, you don't work for a school.
Well, you have to. In order to teach, you have to work for a school.
Or an
Some
association.
proprietors, some
An
education provider.
association who is an approved education provider. Right.
Now, does that fit with the current list of the ride-along instructors? Because that's a QE,
That's,
and they're not, they don't associate with
No.
a provider.
because
They can provide
in that form,
ride-along.
it was actually the ride-along people as well.
Right, but they still have the criteria that they need to satisfy in order to take a student on a
Correct.
ride-along.
However, there is no guidelines. There is no, what are they doing? There's none of that. There's no oversight. They,
When
I
we-
could just take somebody out on a ride-along, fill out the form, and then submit it, have them submit it along with their other educational requirements,
Right.
and they're
that
good to
form-
go.
That form is an affidavit that's notarized.
I agree with that.
Right.
Yeah,
But the only thing that says is that I took you out on a ride-along. It doesn't say that you have met all the requirements
To
knowing
be-
that they had to
to be in
submit
this-
anything that
teach
says
that part.
that these are the guidelines and this is what you're teaching, the same that we would have had to submit and had to submit in order to get our course approved to do the
Right.
40-hour ride-along.
Okay, so I think those are two different discussions, though.
It's the
And
same
what
form.
I'm hearing
That's
though,
what I'm getting at.
is
It was
that,
originally the
Tony,
same paperwork.
maybe we can bring consideration, would this address what your concern is if we talked about detail, adding more detail to a ride-along form that
That may-
identifies
that may-
what the student participated in during that ride-along?
If that makes it part of the affidavit, that makes it.
Right.
Because right now, I could take, if I wanted to, just a hypothetical, if I wanted to just send in my courses to get them approved just for the 330 hours and the 24, right, not the 40-hour ride-along, all of my instructors are qualified to do ride-along, right? I could do the ride-along and just filled out that form 4 times and sent it in and never have submitted anything to Trek that says, these are the guidelines, these are all of the criteria that we have to follow. And I would
And when
be,
you're
and
talking
I would
about
be fine.
guidelines and criteria, are you talking about guidelines and criteria for the instructor or for the content of the ride-along?
Well, the content of the ride-along, but I am an approved ride-along instructor. So as an approved ride-along instructor, I don't have to submit anything currently to Trek. All I have to have done was meet the 5-year and the 200 inspections, paid y'all the fee, got onto the list. After that, I can provide ride-alongs all day long, and you don't have the slightest idea of what I'm doing. Other than I signed the affidavit that says I took you out for 10 hours for 4 days.
So you basically want something, let's say on the affidavit that says, I took them out for, 4 days and this is what we covered, or
The
this
same
is what I am
requirements.
attesting the fact that.
Well, I
these-
feel like
these
they should be
items-
having to meet the same guidelines that we're having to meet, and then they should attest to that fact.
And by we, you mean the school.
Correct.
So I think
That makes sense.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. I know that
And we're
form
paying
went away,
fees, and they're not,
You
and
can't-
y'all said these are QE courses,
You kind of
which you
came
have
up,
to meet certain requirements to be able to even teach the course and do that course.
because there's some schools, or a school that doesn't provide experience. So they teach you the academic and tell you, you're on your own, go find somebody to get you a ride-along.
Right.
So now they're soliciting with inspectors that were on the old list of somebody who approved as a ride-along, and they call them up, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I'm approved, that means I've qualified, I got my 5 years, 200. But I have, all I got's this affidavit says you rode with me, but you don't have all of the guidance like you would in a school where you get approved. And there was that kind of gray area.
So we're just wanting some consistency.
So you could look at, expanding that criteria or adding more detail.
I mean, that was the whole rationale behind doing a practicum, was
Yes.
that we all knew in the
Exactly.
discussion that the
The
ride-along
practicum
for
kind of fixes it.
qualifying
Right.
is lacking in some specificity.
Because when we took away the schools being governing themselves, it's caused a lot of people going, who can teach what? But then at the same time, it's like, I'm gonna call this person that's been inspected for a year to go ahead and do my ride-alongs with. So I'm getting at, because there was no,
He'll do it for $50.
yes. And they're.
But that person wouldn't satisfy the criteria that's still spelled out in the rule to take someone
That's
on a
when people
ride-along.
aren't getting the idea. That's what we're getting at. The form that you're having them fill out doesn't say anything on there. So people are asking, well, I can just call this person and do it.
But on the back end, we're checking that. So when we get the affidavits in, we would look to see that an inspector
Has actually
who's
qualified as
signed,
a
right.
I've heard of somebody who submitted and got turned down after the fact and said, oh, the person you had do your ride-along is not qualified. And you're like, wow. So they're fishing around on the phone trying to find somebody that.
Yeah,
would probably
phone
help with
calls.
this.
we should definitely make sure that people aren't paying, going on a ride-along and then finding out after the fact that they don't qualify. We should do, if that's an issue, we should do.
But it
what we
doesn't,
can.
it just the whole thing we're getting at is the form doesn't state
Yeah, no,
that.
I got
So-
you, so we'll look at that, I think that's valid.
And essentially, the practicum is replacing the ride-along, and so this is an opportunity to add in any detail that we need to.
Right, if and when adopted.
But- Exactly.
But right now, that may be a while, we've got to fix this, this is an imminent
Right.
issue we need to address.
Right.
It might be just a sorry.
Raymond Latham, couldn't you just at the top of the form, just have the instructor attest that he's got the 250 hours and 5 years experience?
Well,
And his license number?
The other thing is,
Qualify.
I don't, yeah, I think that's absolutely something to do, but the other thing is, I didn't think you could be on the list without qualifying.
Right.
Do we
So-
have a list?
Huh?
The
Are we
list
still
still
maintaining
exists, but we're not adding to it.
So somebody new.
So,
What about if there was
List
a
of
way
more.
for the public to look on
List
Strick's
of-
website
list
to
of
see
private
if that
instructors.
person?
There is.
But it's
like you
easy
said,
to find.
But it's historical.
Updated, not people.
Yeah,
Because they took
because
away
we
the
don't
line.
have an inspector license anymore. I mean, an
Is there a reason
instructor
why we're
license.
not updating the list?
Could you have just a?
Well, it's a process. We then have to have an application and a form and a staff reviewer and.
which looks and feels a whole lot like a license.
It's just providing a list of people who qualify to teach a class. It's not licensing them to do it. It's just giving people who need to do it a list of people
If
who
you want to be on
qualify.
the list and you think you're qualified, submit to be qualified, but you're not.
Kind of goes along with instructor.
Yeah,
But then
it's-
when we're looking at active and inactive experience and then reviewing 200 inspections, you know, that's
The list
a
is still
cumbersome
there.
process for no.
It just
What do you have to
needs
do to review 200
verification on the
inspections?
form
I mean, if they
stating
send
that
in
the
a-
inspector that's
like the
still to be
sponsorship
approved
form.
Hold on, I'm trying to
has
listen to it.
completed
Sorry.
the minimum requirements to be a ride-along instructor. Because the
It's
requirements
different
are on the
than a sponsor.
website, but there's no form for it. And
And it's historical. They're not adding.
Okay, real quick. All right.
You guys on the
I know
same
my
page
point
with
is
your
not the
question?
fact of the people that are
We're
on
on the
the
same-
list.
Well,
of
I'm
the
just-
ride-along.
Hold
My
on.
point is the
Hang
fact
on.
that the people that are on the ride-along list, there is no guidance as to exactly what they're doing.
Right.
There's no accountability, there is no responsibility. The people know that the list is there.
No,
Right? It's the people
Right.
that are on the list are not associated
Right.
with any school or anybody.
I got you, Roy. I understand what you're
Right,
saying.
so this is what you're, I think what you're talking about is a market issue. Where as a school, you're held to a criteria in terms of what the expectation is for your ride-along, 40-hour ride-along package. Whereas an individual who's listed on this list of approved instructors is not held to that same standard. So I understand that point, but I think there's also another conversation happening.
Right, I understand, I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the
Okay.
shuffle. Because
Okay.
it's still all about public protection, because I could be
Right.
on that list, and I could just be charging whatever I want to charge to take people
So my
out on a ride
question
along, and not really doing
is,
anything.
what's the difference between doing
Right.
this one and the sponsorship?
Go ahead.
list? I'm just curious, what's the difference between doing this list and doing the list of sponsors and maintaining it?
Experience.
Well, I'm not saying what's the
I know that
difference in
there is a list
requirements.
of sponsors,
No, list of
and that would
sponsors.
be where
There
it-
is. You can go to
Denise
Trick
and I
and
are in
find the list
different
of
areas.
qualified sponsors.
There's a sponsor list and a ride-along list.
But the sponsor list is being kept updated, is it not? While the ride-along list is not?
I don't know.
I think the sponsor list is only if you've requested to be a sponsor.
Well, yeah, you
But
have to
it's being
request it.
updated.
But I'm just saying, is it being maintained? Why can we not do the same thing with the ride-along?
Why,
I would think
I'm
we
just-
want to
Do we
keep a
have
li-
a, is
Well,
there a sponsor list?
Yes,
Yeah, you gotta apply to be approved.
because I get calls, because I'm on it.
Well,
Yeah.
it wouldn't come to education.
I would think we would
If
need to
somebody
keep
wanted to
up
be a
the
sponsor.
ride-along instructor list because they are specifically not affiliated with a school.
Maybe
Because that's where the license went away for instructors, is now it's up to the schools to actually make sure that their teachers are actually qualified, correct?
correct.
So if this specific type of instructor does not have to be associated with a school, that should be something that should be kept, a list that should be kept up.
okay, I'm putting my lawyer hat on to say, this isn't on the agenda, so this is an agenda item for the future.
Let's try.
And a perfectly
Yeah.
good conversation to have. But I think we have enough, staff have enough now to know how we can support you in this discussion.
Okay. Any other items for future agenda?
Sorry.
I tried that twice. Keep cutting me.
So I'll try to working on a schedule to start creating the SOP handout similar to what we did with the legal and ethics 4 years ago. Okay, anything else for the education committee? As far as the rule changes, we're just kind of waiting to see what happens with the state.
We'll bring an updated form, log, Spectra log form
So
that
next.
clarifies that what the process is.
Yep. Okay. All right. Discussion of future meeting dates. believe we're looking at April, correct?
So 15th, I think, is what the scheduled date
It's
is,
supposed to be
right?
this, well, 17th.
17th?
Yeah, so 15th is Wednesday. So
Yeah, so it was gonna be the 17th, but it's already been taken.
Oh, ESAC stole it.
Yeah, ESTAT sold it, so it would be the 6th or the 13th, which is the Monday after Easter. So the 6th, I would say, is preferred. I mean, I just,
Wait, which is the Monday after Easter?
the
13th.
13th, yeah.
Anybody have preferences on the 6th or the 13th? Mine would be the 13th.
I'm out on the 6th.
That's fine.
So it's a Monday, the 13th.
13th.
Which is the day after Easter?
The day after Easter, yeah, if people are traveling or something.
Could be on the
Hungover from Easter. Really?
How you celebrate Easter?
Oh, wow. Easter egg shots or something?
Right.
Exactly.
See, now she's thinking. All right, so
Come
the
on.
April 13th, 10 o'clock. Anything else? Entertain motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made, and we are adjourned at 11:37.
Thanks, everybody.